All right, hello everyone, and welcome to the SOV Horror Podcast. It's been a little minute since we've done this, but I'm back, Tony from SOVHORROR.com. And before we get into today's interview proper, I just want to mention a couple of our new releases we just had. We just put out two movies hosted by Natasha Knighty. We have Minds of Terror by Mark Adams, starring Joe Estevez and Conrad Brooks, as well as David C. Hayes' Blown, which is a killer blow-up doll. I mean, how can you go wrong with that? And then I definitely want to mention this one, and it kind of actually goes with our guest today as well, is a Basement Videos release of Joseph Vogel's Specimen 6. This is a limited release. It's only for 2 months, and by the time you're hearing this, it's probably have less than a month left. So pick this up before it goes out of print, guys. And this kind of goes into our guest today, who's actually worked with Joseph Vogel. And today we have the one, the only Joe Sherlock. Hey, Joe, welcome.
Hey, y'all. Thanks for having me, man.
Oh, for sure. It's awesome to finally talk to you. We actually kind of go way back, which is kind of funny.
Yeah, right.
I think I first, it's hard to really pinpoint when I first, became aware of you and your films, but I think it was via the Retro Media Forum. Old Retro.
I bet it was. There's a lot of people that's where I find. That was a great resource, and a lot of, backyard filmmakers and such. We all met on there, a lot of us.
Yeah, it was really cool. I mean, back then I was still just going to college and, studying film, and it was so cool to have Fred obviously on there. And then guys like you who were kind of more low budget, like you and Ron Ford and people like that on there as well. And everyone was just so really cool about, sharing tricks and tips for filmmaking and stuff like that, which was awesome. And I'm not sure exactly the first movie I saw from you, but I know pretty soon after I kind of became aware of you, I was like, hey, this guy's stuff seems kind of interesting. I need to check him out. And I think it was, I could be wrong, but I think I just went to your site and picked up a bunch of your VHS you had at the time.
Yeah, man.
We Need Earth Women, Vampirosa's Velvet Vault, and the original Odd Noggins.
Yeah.
And immediately fell in love with your work. I mean, it was like, wow, here's this guy making shot-on-video movies that are just kind of quirky, weird. They had a really good sense of humor, and you didn't really see that a lot in the genre as much. More people were trying to be serious or really gory and stuff like that. And you were I felt like you were kind of taking from people like Fred Ray and kind of bringing that Scream Queen kind of aesthetic to kind of comedy shot on video type horror films.
Yeah.
Cool.
And I think part of it was just I couldn't help myself. It was me, I think I liked horror movies, but I also had a group of friends that would be in my movies, and we all had, senses of humor and quirky senses of humor, and would watch Fred Olen Ray movies and watch USA Up All Night and, stuff like that. And so I think it just was a natural melding of all that stuff. But it's funny because back then when I was doing, that was the second half of the 90s, and my first couple of flicks got sold in the back of Draculina magazine on VHS, and of course I had my own site I was trying to sell stuff from, but I got knocked a lot because of the humor. I mean, because there were people that were serious, we're making, we all love Halloween and Friday the 13th and whatever else. I mean, I love those things too, but they were we're making our own version of that, and it's dead serious. Maybe one funny scene or character or something. But mine, a lot of my early stuff had, Monster in the Garage definitely was a comedy, it was a sci-fi horror comedy. And some of the others had a lot of intentional comedy in them. And aside, Michael Legge, who did flat out comedy, absurd, wacky, sort of Three Stooges, Marx Brothers type comedy. I mean, he was sort of on his own island, at least my exposure to a lot of stuff, which was through, the Be Independent boards, the Retro Media boards, Ron Bonk's Salt City Home Video, which then became Sub Rosa. I mean, a lot of that stuff, and Draculina was all, straight horror stuff. So it's interesting in retrospect, people now are like, oh, I dig it because it's got this quirky sense of humor. And that's continued. I mean, my stuff, even the stuff that I do has a lot of straight sort of horror in it. There's either some humor to it, or maybe if it's an anthology, there's some funnier than others. But early on, that was I got knocked for that because it was like, these are just silly. You know, why don't you do something serious? You know, really. It was what I was accused of is it's a cop out to put comedy in it.
No.
It's like if you're putting the comedy in it, that's just a cop out because then you're not having to work so hard. You're just going for the joke. And I don't know if that's true. It was, for me, it was just a natural thing that my sense of humor just permeated into those projects, and they turned out that way.
Well, you were definitely, I would say you were ahead of your time. And I mean, and if you even look now, I mean, look at most of the independent movies that are coming out now. I'd say 90% of them are this definitely big mix of humor and horror, you know. That's definitely been more embraced by the low budget film community.
Yeah, I think it ebbs and flows. I mean, you can find them throughout, you know, film history, but I like all kinds of stuff. I mean, I like straight horror stuff. I like comedy horror stuff and all stuff in between. I just saw Jacob's Wife recently with Barbara Crampton, and that had a lot of comedy in it. It was great. I really dug it. So I think there's room for everything.
Right, for sure.
Yeah,
for sure. And one of my favorites, and let me grab it here, that I definitely want to discuss is Inbred Redneck Vampires.
Oh, yeah.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, was this originally called Blood-Sucking Redneck Vampires? Because I feel that was the title I first saw it on. I think I rented it from Netflix 5 billion years ago when they still sold the disc, and I thought that was the title.
It was, and it was on Netflix, yeah. Yeah, so that came about because actually I had done some stuff with John Bowker. I've known John Bowker since middle school, and so we, you know, I made Dimension of Blood, and he had moved away to a different town, and I made Dimension of Blood. I started it at the end of 1995, and he came to town, and I showed him that, and he was like, "Oh my God, this is awesome! I want to do this." And so he ended up making Dreamwalkers, which you've put out in a beautiful edition, and then after that was The Evil Maker and a whole bunch of other stuff in a flurry of years there. But man, what was I talking about? Oh, Redneck Vampires. So John had connected up with Tim Ritter online, and so the three of us worked on some stuff. I know Ron Bonk ended up picking up Housebound and The Seekers from John, which were made around that time, I think a little bit earlier. So anyways, Tim Ritter was actually the guy that contacted us about this. So basically, Ron had, I believe, picked up a movie called Inbred Rednecks. And for some reason, I'm thinking it was made in South Carolina. I could be totally wrong about that. But anyways, I believe that was a movie. I don't know that he was involved in it. I think someone just made it and then he bought it. So Inbred Rednecks. And that had done very well for him. So his thought at the time, this was Ron Bonk's, he thought, well, I got to hop on this and capitalize on this. So he came up with these titles and log lines, basically. So I know he hired Chris Seaver eventually to do like Inbred Rednecks.
Yeah.
Close Encounters of the Inbred Redneck Kind, something like that. I can't remember if he had another one or not, but it seems three of them. But Blood-Sucking Redneck Vampires was the one that he was pitching to us. And it was basically, here's the title. And it was basically a sentence. It was like, a small town is invaded by vampires, and the townsfolk are all so dumb that they turn into vampires, but then end up killing themselves in a stupid way, like walking out into the sunshine, etc. Period. Like, that was it.
Right.
And so at the time, I had met this guy, Mike Haig, who had helped me with some post-production and some special effects on the original Odd Noggins and on Underbelly. And so he and I teamed up to write and make Vampires based on that little. And so we spent a whole bunch of time writing this ridiculously monstrous in scope, huge script with a whole bunch of characters. But the cool thing was he had a coworker who lived on a farm in this very small town up in Washington State. And so it was great because we pretty much had the run of their property, and they got us into the local bar in town and a couple other businesses and gathered a bunch of extra actors and things like that. And then, the bad part, it was 3.5 hours drive away from me. But so we brought up sort of a core group of actors, and then there were a bunch of stuff from the roles. So that's how that came to be. It was Ron saying, I had this successful movie, let's do some other similar movies, and here's a title idea and a concept, and we were like, okay, we'll run with it.
Right. Nice. Now, was that your first movie that you actually directed that was distributed by someone other than yourself?
I guess so. I mean, I made so Hugh Gallagher at Draculina actually put out a Dimension of Blood Monster in the Garage double feature on VHS. I don't know when that was. That was the late
On the Cine label. Yeah.
and he put out a, they called it the, so he started this line. So at the time, this is before DVD, so he started this line called Draculina Cine, Cine, and his concept was that at the time it was like $29.95 or something average for a VHS tape, like in a clamshell, for that type of stuff. I remember Red Lips was on sale in the back of his magazine. I think that was like 30 or maybe 35. But a lot of stuff was like $24.95 was a standard kind of price for that stuff. And so he had this idea, if we just sold tapes in a plain box, a plain white box with a cutout in it that showed you the label on the tape, and we'll sell them super cheap for $10, right? Because he would save the cost of buying the clamshells and getting the inserts printed, and he would just dub them off himself. So it was pretty cheap to produce, and that would appeal to buyers who are like, God, I'm just spending all my money, $20, $30 at a pop to buy these movies. And suddenly he's like, well, you can get these movies for $10 in a plain box if you don't care about the packaging. So I got in on that. So he asked me to be a part of that. So we did a Draculina Cine version of Crimson Heather, which was basically just the first sort of cut that I did of it. And then later shot some more stuff for it and put it out myself. So, technically he was putting those things out on VHS. But I had made those myself. So yeah, I guess that was the first thing that I made for someone else that then they distributed. Yeah.
Right. And like we mentioned, I mean, that got out pretty good. I mean, that was in the early days of Netflix when they were putting out physical discs still.
Right.
And, they were still carrying lots of independent movies, which was really cool. I'd love to hear just your opinion actually on that. Cause just as like a fan, like I was one of those guys who, once Netflix came along and realized like, oh crap, they got movies, by Chris Seaver and Ron Bonk's stuff and all these other, catalogs of films, like it was really cool and really exciting for us people in low budget independent horror and stuff.
Yeah.
And, even when they first started the streaming, it seemed like it was lots of, Chris Seaver, Ron Bonk SRS type titles, stuff like that. And then obviously slowly they pretty much phased out all that stuff. And so, but I guess like, I'm just kind of wondering in your mind, like, how did you feel kind of about that time? Was that like really exciting for you to see that people could now rent your movie and stuff like that?
Yes, because I was, as I'm and it was in my 20s. Yeah, I guess I was in my 20s, 20s, 30s. It was. Yes, it was very exciting because, it's just, Dimension of Blood was shot on a gigantic VHS camcorder. And even the few movies after that, they were shot on like high 8 millimeter. I didn't even move to mini DV tapes till, I don't know, it was it was, mid 2000s. I sort of always lagged behind. So, here was, it was very exciting. Here were movies that we made with whatever we had. I those movies I shot on VHS or high 8. I had a 3/4 inch tape deck to deck system that I would use, which at the time was ancient, and certainly other people were all editing on computers and I wasn't there yet. So and the first several Dreamwalkers was edited that way, and Evil Maker was edited that way. By the time John was doing Evil Maker 2, he had bought a standalone editing kind of computer system. But anyways, the fact that we could put these things together and we made them with our friends, and then there was a Hollywood Video down the street from my house, and I in there, and Nation was on the shelf. This was maybe 2003, something like that. Mm-hmm. It blew me away. I was like, oh my God, I shot this movie in this town. I shot this movie down the street, It was extremely exciting. And then, the early days of Netflix, I had the same reaction you did. I was like, oh, this is awesome. Because I bought a fair number of movies back in the day. And I suppose a downside was I was like, oh, this is great. I can see all this stuff. I can see a bunch of these Chris Seaver movies or a bunch of Sub Rosa movies, Jared Bookwalter movies, etc., and stuff I hadn't even heard of, or stuff that I had read about in Draculina a few years earlier, and like, oh, here it is, add it to my list. The downside was I saved a lot of money because suddenly I wasn't buying those things. It's bad for the people selling them, I suppose. But that's obviously the way it goes and continues to this day. But yeah, it was very exciting. The fact Platoon of the Dead was on Netflix. I mean, at one point, I think I had 4, maybe 5 movies that were either mine or John's that were on there, and that was pretty exciting.
Right. And nowadays, they probably won't touch any of that, I presume. I mean,
I doubt it. I mean, yeah. I don't want to say it's the same cycle over and over again, but it's similar because, if you think about that, I won't go too long on this. If I go too long, stop me on it. But because I had this conversation with people, and I'm not sure how this all worked with like theatrical and drive-ins and stuff like that, but certainly, there were a bunch of mom and pop video stores. I mean, when I was in high school, that's when the video boom started, and there were tons of independently owned by people in town video stores, and there were spinner racks in the little grocery stores that they would have videos in, and so it was all very small. And then chains came in, and so I guess what I'm saying is it was small, and so distributors would distribute all kinds of stuff. You could get mainstream movies, but of independent mid-range places, and of course with the boom, as it were, they were hungry for product. And so companies popped up that got all these old movies that they would then put out. So there was this explosion of independent, low budget, genre stuff in particular, because there's always an audience for that, right? So then, big chains come in. Well, they still were going to make a lot of money from that genre stuff. And so they would carry it. But eventually they make deals with big studios to get cheaper prices and deals. And it ends up being more lucrative to those chains to buy 100 copies of the latest release because they could get it ultra cheap. And so they would stop, they would spend their money on that instead of buying, some Don Dohler movies from some distributor, right? And then the chain squeezed out the mom and pop shop. So then those didn't even exist to sort of go to get your weird stuff. I mean, there was a shop in town here. I don't even think he was even open a year, called Butler's Beehive, and as in the letter B. And it was awesome. He had Red Lips there. He had tons of stuff there that you would see in the back of Draculina and European horror and all kinds of great genre stuff. And it was a great alternative to Blockbuster and Hollywood Video that were in my town. And then, like I said, he only lasted. So, but you think of that whole thing, right? And then you think of Netflix, right? Netflix comes up and like they're hungry for products. So they're buying stuff from the studios, but also from Jared Bookwalter and Sub Rosa and all these other places. And they've got, discs all over the country. But then they get bigger and bigger and they make deals with studios. And the difference here is then now they start producing their own stuff, right? And all of that means they're spending their money on this big stuff, squeezes out the small guys. So today, you look at something like Amazon, that same thing has already happened with Amazon, right? Amazon had a ton of stuff, a ton of indie stuff on Prime streaming. And I don't know how many years ago now, 4, 3, there was like what they called the big bloodbath or whatever, where all of a sudden, a bunch of guys I knew that had 10, 20 titles, they were like, well, Amazon dumped all my stuff today and with no reason, and then people would try different methods to get back on there. And it seems to me maybe a year ago, there was another one of those where they were like, well, I had 6 more movies on there and now all those are gone. So I think it's the same thing. They're just squeezing it out. Right. At this moment in time, Tubi TV is a great resource to find tons of stuff. It reminds me of the corners of the mom and pop shops. Like, here's all this obscure stuff. I love it. I could dig and find all kinds of weird stuff, old stuff, plus everything, TV shows and they've got everything, right? And Fox bought them. Somebody bought them like earlier this year.
I think it was Viacom, or something like that.
So I'm just waiting, it's cynical, but I'm sort of just waiting for there to be the bloodbath. One day Tubi's like, you know what? We're going to dump all this weird, obscure stuff and we're going to focus on X, or we made a deal with this studio. Now we're going to exclusively stream this. I mean, I don't know what'll happen. I mean, hopefully that doesn't happen, but I wouldn't be surprised if it does, because that seems to be the cycle. And then there'll just be some other stuff.
Right.
I saw an interview with Joseph Oakley just today where he was talking about wanting to take his next movie out on the road, like at drive-ins and dive bars and stuff like that. And he said, that's what you got to do, because all these other methods are all, getting rid of their indie content or already have. So in my experience, I try to have my stuff out in a variety of places, but also from me, so that that's the default. It's like, yeah, well, you used to be able to see this on Netflix and now you can't, but at least you can get it from me. Or in the case of Redneck Vampires, I don't own that. I made that for Sub Rosa. So, but he still sells a DVD on Amazon, a burn on demand. So you can still get it if you want to, I don't know. That was a long answer, but that's my thoughts on some of that stuff. It was very exciting when all that stuff was on there. And I still get excited when stuff pops up, being out there for people, but I wonder about that cycle, if that'll continue.
Yeah, no, you're totally right. I mean, I worked in a video store in the late 90s, early 2000s. And yeah, the way it pretty much worked, I don't think a lot of people get this, is big studios would literally buy shelf space. So they would literally go, we're going to buy this end cap from you so you display our recent titles. And from what I was hearing from our higher ups was, long story short, was at some point the studios are like, we don't want you to carry competitors. We don't want you to carry any indie stuff. We don't want to carry this. We want a majority of the shelf space, and we're not going to give you these copies of, Lord of the Rings or whatever, unless you, abide by what we want. And it sounds like that model pretty much also switched to Netflix and other streaming providers as well.
Yeah. Wow, that's really, Yeah.
But, ultimately, some people could argue that maybe this kind of stuff is more meant for the underground anyway. Obviously, it's not, for everyone's taste, for sure. But
right. Well, and I think, obviously, to your, the stuff that you're doing, there's an audience for physical media out there, too. I mean, that's sort of a tangent, a related issue, because, tons of people stream stuff, but some of those people who stream stuff still want physical media, and there's certainly a collector mode in the physical media world. But I still get copies made of my stuff that I'm selling myself, and there's definitely an audience out there. It might be small. I don't know if it'll get smaller or maybe it'll stay the same, because there's some of it's like young people that are into this. I mean, it could be like records. I mean, I know there was some statistic recently about record being some point that they hadn't for X amount of years or whatever. One difference is the record's $30 now, but it's still out there. It's still being done, and there's an audience for it. And some of that audience is younger. It's not all the holdovers from when they bought records from when they were a kid. Some of it's people who didn't buy records when they were a kid, but they've gotten into it. So that's an interesting thing to see continue.
Right. I have a lot of people ask me, like, why don't we do streaming with a lot of our titles? And I do have rights for streaming with many of them. But my thing is, like, I am a physical media guy. That's what I personally enjoy. And it's kind of like, I don't want to get too much into just the business of it, but I work for multiple companies, film companies, doing their libraries on different platforms and stuff like that. And you'll constantly see stuff having to get re-edited or changed to appease whatever platform it is, whether it's stuff like gore, nudity, language, stuff like that. And it's like, they're not going to change your physical media copy.
Yeah.
Or can they take it away from you? You subscribe to the network and you go, okay, well, I think I have this, or I bought this movie off iTunes. Oh crap, iTunes contract is no longer valid.
Right.
I don't have access to my movie anymore. So,
it's
always there, which is really cool.
And that's all in the fine print. I mean, you agree to this massive document that you never read that says you can buy it, but actually if our contract with that provider runs out, you're up shit creek. And that I've heard from people that's happened to. And it's funny, I bought a movie today that I just want to have the physical copy because you can't really see it anywhere. And I just want to have it so I can watch it when I want it,
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and I got to show just this real quick, and I'm not trying to brag, but I just want people to literally see how many movies you've made, Joe, or have been involved with. I mean, I can't even hold all these in my hands. I mean, there's so many movies, and I know we're barely going to be able to scratch the
That is
surface
awesome.
of all these today. But I mean, I mainly show these to show that physical media is definitely not dead, and there's definitely fans for it. And I feel honestly, I was very honored when you accepted my offer to release some of your early work, because I love those movies so much. And I noticed, honestly, one of the reasons I'd approach you about it was, every so often I like to check out websites, and you got a great website, people. If you haven't been to Skullface Astronaut, I mean, you could just go down a rabbit hole looking at pictures and all your different projects you've worked on and stuff like that. It's a really cool website. So definitely check that out, folks. But I'd seen that some of your movies weren't available anymore. I think I saw We Need Earth Woman wasn't available anymore at that time. And I was like, why is this movie not available? I love this one. And the funny story about that, and I definitely want to talk to you about that movie because it is one of my favorites of yours, which is really funny because from what, you've shared, with the commentary and stuff like that, is that movie was really just kind of pieced together from leftover footage.
Yeah.
To me, it's so amazing that you can make such a great movie out of all this leftover footage, So you maybe mind talking just a little bit about kind of how We Need Earth Women kind of came about?
Yeah. Well, it's funny. I think the reason that people, there's a lot of people that really like that. And I think the reason it's because it's so wacky. And part of why it's so wacky is because it was sort of piecemealed together, and then we sort of built upon that, and it just got stranger and stranger. Yeah, so, I mean, I have to credit Fred Olin Ray because he, okay, so I used to do a zine called Dr. Squid. There they are. Awesome. Look at you, man. That's awesome. So, so I used to do this zine, and so it started with, like, reviews of B movies and also articles just about weird stuff, right? Weird stuff I was interested in. And so anyway, I did an article in one of the issues about movies made from leftovers. And it was because I had read something where Fred Olin Ray was talking about how he had footage he had shot for another movie, or there was like, it was the story where it was like, where there was a set that they weren't going to break down till Monday. And so we just made up some scenes to shoot over the weekend to take advantage of this set. And then, to the movie and came out that movie, but also things like in Star Slammer, like he had Ted Bow has shipped out the Deadly Spawn puppet that Fred used, and I remember Fred saying, yeah, it was pretty beat up. But like they have this big, for anybody who hasn't seen it, sorry, spoiler alert, it's a women in prison space movie. They're in a space prison. And there's one point where they're going to have like the arena battle, and the door opens and it's the Deadly Spawn that comes running out to fight everybody. And I was like, oh my God, that's the Deadly Spawn. And so it's stuff like that. He had footage from Planet of the Dinosaurs that he used in movies and just stuff like that. So I was inspired by that, like, well, what could I do with sort of leftovers I had? And one thing that had happened was when I shot Monster in the Garage, I shot with this one actress, and she became very problematic after the fact. And I made the decision, you know what, I'm just going to cut her. I'm going to reshoot all of that character's scenes, and which I did. So Monster in the Garage, that's a whole other story, but I shot a bunch of the movie, and then like 6 months later, I reshot a bunch of scenes to replace this actress. But then a few years passed, and I was like, well, this is dumb. I have all footage. I shot it. She signed off on the release form. And so that was sort of an extra piece I had. And in talking to my friend Tom Schaefer at the time, he was also making his own movies. And he actually had a bunch of things, because he would often shoot movies, and then someone would, with like coworkers at the pizza place he worked at, and then those people would leave and he would know how to contact them. So he'd end up reshooting stuff with different people, like, oh, well, I can't shoot more stuff, so I'll reshoot that stuff and continue with this new person. So between us, we had some leftover pieces. And yeah, I just got this idea to try to assemble a movie based on that. And so the aliens coming to search for women was the device to use the different clips, because they had different girls in them. So the idea was, well, the aliens come to Earth to try to find a woman. the idea is there's a space zoo, right? This is sort of an Alien Factor ripoff. There's a space zoo, and the Earth woman subject has died, so they need a replacement. So they go to Earth to get another woman to put in the zoo. That's the idea with aliens. And so, that was the device to use this different footage of women. But so I cut that stuff together, and Tom said, oh, well, I have these extra bits and pieces of stuff. And actually, since I had come up with this idea, I was shooting stuff, and then I'd end up just shooting extra pieces at the end of other movies. So I was shooting Dreamwalkers with John at the time. And there was a sequence called Monsters Under the Bed, where the main character is in this dream, and these monsters were reaching out from under the bed. And at the end of it, he actually sees a full-blown monster, which was my friend Tom, and my friend Rob Miracle did makeup all over his face. After that shoot, we went back to Tom's house. He still had the makeup on his face, and we just made up some stuff for We Need Earth Women. We just made up extra, like, you're in the makeup, we have time, let's go to your house and make some stuff up. So we did. And so that added to the sort of hodgepodge of it all. And then it was sort of, that goes on for quite a while. I was like, well, now I should have the aliens actually get a woman. And then, I wrote some new stuff after they get the woman and they get on the spaceship and they travel, and then they end up crashing on another planet, and you get sort of that Planet of the Apes vibe where they like crashed on this planet. So yeah, so that's the story, I guess. It started as this hodgepodge of leftover pieces, and then once I assembled all that together, I was like, well, now I'll do a little bit more to sort of finish this story out. And I think because of how it was made, it jumps around in directions, and we always just try to make it fun. That's the story with that.
No, and it's so funny. I mean, honestly, it's one of my favorite of yours. There's so many kind of just cool, interesting moments, and one of the moments that just cracks me up, and I don't know why. Every time I think of that movie, I think of this scene, and I believe it's your son in this scene, and it's the scene where the skull gets dropped down to Earth, and your son picks up and goes, "Skull!"
Yeah, yeah, he was 2 at the time,
right?
And yeah, we just the transporting a woman up to the spaceship malfunctions, and so the alien ends up with just this skull, so he just dumps it out of the spaceship with a flushing noise, of course. And so I just shot my son out in the back on his little playset, picking up the skull. Yeah, I just threw everything in that, man.
Right. No, it's so great, and it's real cool too, because I know you still work with your son on projects. You guys have a plan together, and then also I see he's been in some of the more recent movies as well. So how is it kind of being a dad and like working with your son on like creative projects?
It is fun. He was he was in that, and then I did I've done some short things and little goofy things with him and his friends over the years. And then when he was in high school, he was in Drifter. I did a segment of Drifter with him in it. Then he got real busy for a while. He was involved in all kinds of stuff, Taekwondo and Boy Scouts and high school in general, But I shot with him this last week on for Dark Zone 13 Part 2. So the things, I did a movie called Thing 666, which is coming out later this year. And he actually plays a pretty major part. There's like 3 stories in that, and in one of them, he's kind of the third lead in it. That was good. And it's fun. I think he's good. He's mostly available, and
right. And best part about probably working with your kids is you don't have to pay them, right?
Yeah, I buy them lunch, and that's
right.
Yeah.
Nice, very cool. So another one I definitely want to talk about. Now, this isn't one of your movies, but you did work heavily on this movie. And here's a very old DVD edition of it I have. The Evil Maker. And this was one that really shocked me. I mean, I'll be honest, I bought it because it has this great picture of Stephanie Beaton on the cover, who people from the 90s definitely remember her. She was in a lot of stuff. And I remember popping this in, and then all of a sudden seeing, Joe Sherlock and John Bowker. And I was like, I recognize those names. And to me, that's like, John Bowker's, I love his movies as well. And it's always hard to pick like a favorite by any filmmaker for me, because I feel filmmakers are a lot more than just one movie. They're kind of the sum of their parts. But that one has always really stuck out to me as being a personal favorite. And
Yeah.
kind of was that after Dreamwalkers or pre-Dreamwalkers?
That was after Dreamwalkers. I like that one too. That was an example of really John trying to his game. I mean, he Dreamwalkers was made in pieces over about a year. I think we shot, every month or two for a long weekend, and the storyline lends itself to that because the character kind of goes through a bunch of different dreams, and so each of those dreams sort of became its own shoot. So it worked that way. But also, that was the first thing he had really done, and I had done, I think, a couple things by that point, and so we were still learning. And anyway, but so with so Dreamwalkers, we shot all that stuff, and I think we were working on editing it, and he was able to secure a loan to make this Evil Maker movie, and he had wanted to have a Scream Queen in it, and so he got a loan so we had a budget, and he flew Stephanie up, and we basically did like a 10-day shoot. It seems to me maybe like one pickup later for just some fill-in shots or something, but basically we shot 99% of the movie in that time because she was in most of it, and that's just how we scheduled it to do everything there. So so she flew in, and the house that we shot was family owned that. I mean, someone was living there, and they went over to their mom's house for a week. So we and so it just sort of like was trying to push it up a level, and I think it really shows compared to a lot of the other goofball stuff we were doing. This was like taking it seriously, and he did some auditions. Some of it the people were friends, but a few of them he did auditions for. And my friend Rob did all the makeup effects, and made the fake axe head and all that stuff. And there were a lot of elaborate effects compared to what we had done before. And I know he bought some like music library music, so it's all orchestral scary music as compared to just synthesizer doodlings by me. And so it was actually the first movie that I worked on that had nudity in it, and so that was another threshold to cross. So it was a lot of things that were moving up a level and doing things we hadn't done before. The big, we need to take time off from work. Everybody's got to take time off. We all got to take this week off, and shoot a weekend and then a week and then the next weekend because we're flying someone in, so we have to make it now. We can't just screw around on the weekends on this one. And it was ambitious. I mean, there were a lot of big locations. We shot some of the dream sequence stuff where she's getting chased around by Felicia with the axe, was in a Grange Hall. So he rented a Grange Hall for a day, a night, and we shot all over the place in there. And so I don't know. Does that answer your question? That was
well, it's a very ambitious film, and I think a lot of John's films are extremely ambitious. And one thing I've always really appreciated about his work is definitely the script writing in them. You can tell, it's not just your normal schlock. It's definitely, he's trying to craft a atmospheric type horror film, which I think was pretty refreshing at that time, in that kind of late 90s, early 2000s, because you didn't see a lot of that, in the low budget, especially on that type of micro budget, because obviously I know these movies were made for very little money. So, and I mean, such a great film. If people haven't seen Evil Maker 1 or 2, they're both really good. And I think you sell those, don't you, Joe? Can people go to your site and get those?
I do, actually. Yeah. So Tempe Video put out a double feature of that several years back with a bunch of nice extras on it. And that one there. So, and that's the one I've got for sale now. So if people do want that, I've got that available.
Yeah, definitely check that out, guys. It's really good. And
there's the cool thing for me is that when we did part 2, Mike Haig, who I mentioned earlier that I made Redneck Vampires with, he followed us for most of that shoot with a camera, and made a nice long I think it's like 45 minutes long documentary about the making of Evil Maker 2 that I think is a great window in, making micro budget stuff. I think a lot of it applies today. I mean, if we did that today, the equipment would be different. The lighting kits would be LED and the cameras would be super, better, and we'd be shooting digitally and probably have someone downloading footage to a laptop right on set. But all the other stuff would be the same. You're like, well, we got to plan this out. We got to hork all this food out and carry these coolers out here. And we got to drive to this house and we got to do this blood effect with this air compressor. Oh, that didn't work. We got to do it again. All that type of stuff would still all be the same. So I think Mike did a great job on putting that together. And I think it's a true, I don't know what the word, authentic look at making those no budget movies with, that still probably applies today.
Right. And you mentioned the aspect that was kind of the first movie you guys did with nudity. Now, was there a reason there wasn't nudity in the earlier films, or was it mainly just because you couldn't get anyone to do those types of scenes, or was it that actually a thing on your level you just didn't want to put nudity in your films?
I don't know. It wasn't. I think it's because when we started, we literally were just working with our friends, and that would be sort of awkward, I guess. Right. John, like I said, Evil Maker was the attempt to sort of bring it all up a level, and I think he included nudity because that's an element that distributors would want. I mean, I had made stuff, and I would get my own VHS tapes struck. I mean, I'd send the master file to a duplicator. So I'd get a box of VHS tapes. I would order clamshells from a place called Mr. Video online. And so I'd get clamshells, and then I would design my own covers. I'd get those photocopied, color photocopied at Kinko's or at a print shop. And then I'd assemble everything, right? And so, that was sort of I just started out doing that. I didn't think my stuff was good enough to be distributed, right? I wasn't going to try to send my stuff to a distributor. It's like, I'm just making these backyard movies with my friends. They're fun. And I'll just make copies myself and sell them. And so, but John's plan from the get-go was, I'm going to make this movie and I'm going to find a distributor to buy it. That was his whole plan. He wasn't interested in making his own copies or selling it. Cause I had a website and I had email lists, and I was doing the zine, but I also had I would do mailings to promote my movies, every month. The stuff that I was doing, right? Because I was into marketing, and I mean, my day job was marketing, so I was into all that stuff anyway. He was not interested in that. He wanted to make the movie, and then, the distribution and the design of everything, that was all someone else's gig. So I think nudity was included because that was an element distributors would want. They'd be like, all right, well, how long is it? Who's in it? Is there nudity in it? That's probably what they wanted to know. So I think it was because of that. And I think that just opened the door for me to do that. I mean, it wasn't that I was intentionally not doing it. We found out one of our friends perfectly happy doing nudity, Shannon. And so we ended up putting her, she was in Evil Maker 2, and she was in Crimson Heather. And although she was in Crimson Heather Unless the Vampires without nudity, but then later on was happily naked. So she ended up doing those parts for us. And then it just became, what happened, I think, was our circle of friends got bigger. It was friends of friends. And then John did a few movies where, he would talk to people. I think he ran a few classified ads maybe and got some people. I'm trying to think how this worked. So for Seekers, there's a Seekers. Yeah, Seekers. Oh, I can't even remember. There's a stripper in there. I think it is Seekers. And there's a stripper in there who he ran an ad in the local university newspaper looking for someone to play this part. And then an actual stripper responded. And so she was perfect in the part. But a few things like that happened. And then actually from doing screenings, I started doing screenings at theater pubs and some other places. And through that, people would come to see the movie and then be like, oh, I'd like to be in your next movie. And just because of that, the circle of people who would be in the movies group. Some of them were fine with nudity, so I took advantage of that. Like, well, then you will do this, so I'll make this scene. And these people aren't interested, so they'll do these other scenes. Just sort of went from there.
Right. Because I mean, one of your modern trademarks would definitely be the shower scene. I mean, if you watch a modern Joe Sherlock movie, you're gonna get at least one, if not two or more shower scenes.
Yeah. Well, you know, it's an easy way to get that in the movie. I mean, I still subscribe to the theory that it's an element. You know, I think, you know, nudity and blood and guts and you know, action, and they're all elements, monsters, etc. So I think it's still looking for, you know, it's like, this is a great horror movie. Oh, really? Does it have any boobs in it? Does it have a lot of blood? Is there a cool monster in it? I think those questions are still being asked.
Oh, for sure.
And I like those movies. So, you know, that's why it's in there. And the shower scene is an easy way to just get that in there. You know, it's easier than doing some sort of love scene, because, you know, a love scene is more complicated to shoot. Plus, you've got to have actors that are comfortable with that. Actually, they're a pain in the butt to shoot, tell you the truth. And shower scenes are painfully easy. So it's easy to just throw one of those in. You get the skin quotient that the fans are looking for, and you can move on with the storyline.
Right. And you also have like a few kind of other trademarks, I would say, that you see a lot in your films, such as the making and eating of sandwiches. As well as pudding. Pudding is in a lot of the films as well. Do you? Yeah. So I guess my question with that, with kind of those three things that we've kind of mentioned, like, do you kind of at this point intentionally try to throw that stuff in there because it's kind of fun to you and to your fans? Like,
a little bit, yeah. I was doing so much for so long where I wasn't really paying attention to it in that way, and then I think several years I sort of, I don't know if it was a review someone did or just something somebody told me that was kind of like what you just said. Right. Like, those are your trademarks. I'm like, they are? And then I sort of thought about it, like, oh, I guess they are. And so, so it's gotten to the point where, sometimes I'll try to put that stuff in there. I mean, there's a line now that's been in probably 7 or 8 movies. Cynthia's a lying sack of shit. And that came from one of my friends getting a divorce. And that has become a trademark. Like I said, the shower scenes are in there a lot because it's an easy way to get some nudity in there without having to have a complicated shoot. And this sandwich making, I don't know, man. I mean, I did that in Odd Noggins, I guess, at the end of the movie is a guy making a sandwich. And I did that again at the end of Things 5 Strange Monsters. I don't know, you know, I like the food. There's a lot of, you're right. There's a sandwich making in Sneakers, which isn't my movie, but I think maybe John put it in there because I had it in my movie. It is kind of fun to put those things in there. A lot of times I'll look at, like with Dark Zone 13 Part 2, which I'm just wrapping up. I mean, I looked at, like, what did I use in Dark Zone 13, right? I used this corpse prop, and I had this Necronomicon, talking about, like, physical props. But I didn't use this mask, and I didn't use this monster prop or monster puppet. And, I didn't use, the clean suit gas mask guys. And so I almost made, like, a laundry list of things like, well, this wasn't in the first one, so I could probably work all these into the second one. And I have used a lot of those. Like, I just shot something a few weekends ago with guys in clean suits and gas masks coming in and doing some stuff. I think that imagery is always cool to work with, kind of like the George Romero's The Crazies and a million other movies. It's like shocking. All of a sudden, here's like the clean suit guys come in. Well, I did that in Beyond the Wall of Fear. There's a story about this woman crazy after being drugged, and at the end of it, like these clean suit guys with gas masks come in and pull her out of the house and throw her into a car, and you realize, oh wait, this is like some crazies like scenario. I think, and also, the pudding started with Dimension of Blood because I had a girl melt. I wanted to do this whole sequence where she had been the victim of this experiment, and she was talking to the main character to pass him the floppy disk. This tells you how long ago it was. The floppy disk with the information on it. And then she melts. And so the way we did it was cutting back and forth with several shots. She would either drool pudding out of her mouth, and then we started putting pudding on her face. And then I had actually made a paper mache head and torso that we then put, and this is so stupid. I had a wig on her and a stocking cap, and the wig, unfortunately, once you put the stocking cap on, the wig looked very fake. It was just sort of these very, very fake looking strands of black coming out from under the stocking cap. But the reason I did that obviously was because then I had to put that wig and the stocking cap on the dummy. But anyways, I had made this paper mache prop, and with holes where the eyes and the mouth were, and my whole plan, I was going to have a plastic bag full of pudding in my hand inside the prop, and I was going to squeeze it to force pudding out of the eye sockets in the mouth, right? I thought that would be super cool, because I cut back and forth with Tom reacting in horror, and I thought this would be great. You cut back, and all of a sudden it's like, blah, it's all coming out of her eye sockets and everything. And so we did the shot, and I squeezed the bag, and the pudding all went inside the prop. So it's like, oh no, my whole point of doing this didn't work. So we reset, and I just put pudding all over the face of it, and we just used it for that. It still grosses out, but that's where the pudding started, because I was like, that's a cheap and easy way to make slime. Mm-hmm. And I've told this story before. There's a guy in Eugene I know that made a movie. Eugene's a town south of me. So another local filmmaker had made a movie that showed at this one film festival. And it was a horror short about like this, an asteroid or something had hit. And it was all slimy. And he actually bought Ultra Cal, which is like the actual slime that Hollywood buys, like for the alien drool and everything. He had actually bought a bucket of that to use for his movie. And I was just always take the cheap way out, So I was like, when I did Monster in the Garage, I used KY jelly for the slime coming out of the monster's mouth, which was, very cheap compared to buying Ultra slime from Berman Industries or wherever you get it. So the same idea of the pudding. It's like, well, I'll just make pudding. That'll be goopy, and I put green. I made banana pudding, and maybe it was lemon. I can't remember. I think maybe it was lemon, but I put blue food coloring in it, so it was green. I used a lot of pudding and odd noggins. Yes.
Yeah, very cool. And one thing that I've always found really admirable about your films, and especially as I've learned more kind of about the behind the scenes and all that, is really just how much work you yourself actually do. And I don't think a lot of people understand, how much work you do on the movies. I mean, not only are you shooting them, writing them, directing them, but typically you're doing a lot of the special effects and stuff like that. I know your buddy Rob Miracle helps out with that stuff as well. But I know you've also made, like, for instance, the Monster in the Garage, you made that yourself, and some of those puppets. And I still remember, I think, and I first saw this on the Fred Olen Ray board, or maybe it was on your website years ago, and I don't recall what movie it is, but you had made a skeleton out of 2-liter bottles. And I remember just thinking, this is the most amazing thing. Like, it's so creative. And, like, was it just, I mean, I get maybe it's out of necessity that you do most of it yourself. But, I mean, to me, it shows a real dedication for your craft. And to me, it was always very admirable. And I know, like, even when I got into my own filmmaking, I kind of took the same route as well out of necessity. It was like, okay, well, I guess I'm doing the effects because I don't have an effects guy, and stuff like that. But how much of that do you actually enjoy? Like, I'm guessing, because I know you're also an artist and you've done amazing work. I mean, you did the cover art for a release of Blown recently, which is a great cover artwork.
Thanks for asking me to do that. That was fun.
But how like is that something you still like really enjoy, is kind of just getting your hands wet with paper mache or whatever it may be to kind of put together these different props and stuff?
Yeah, it is usually. Part of it, I think, like you said, is sort of necessity. I mean, when I first was doing stuff, I just I had all these ideas for Dimension of Blood, and just I did it myself. Rob did a lot of stuff on that too, but I made that paper mache head and torso because I had this effect in mind. I'm like, okay, here's how I could do it. The 2-liter bottle thing, I just want to touch on that real quick. Somewhere I had seen something about doing like a body in a bag, or like if you needed a dead body that you're like dragging to bury or throw in the lake or something. They had said, you know, you tape all these 2-liter bottles together because they're like, you probably already have them, you know, just save some empty bottles. But then, you know, they're light, right? So you tape them together, and that provides you sort of bulk inside this body bag or sleeping bag or whatever you're putting the body in. So, and I just always remembered that. I saw that probably on the Be Independent boards or maybe Retro Media, just somewhere way back when, about on something talking about, you know, making your own movies. So that was the thing that inspired me. And so that was for Housebound.
Okay.
Well, okay, I take that back. You know, originally that was for Dreamwalkers, because at the end of Dreamwalkers, you're in this nightmare realm, and John wanted to have statues that were like frozen people, that they were like frozen. I don't know how to, it reminded me of Star Trek, right? It reminded me of some sort of thing at Star Trek. We're like, well, we're going to shoot in this space, right? And we need to have like frozen, tortured souls that the bad guy has, you know, like a Medusa has frozen them in time, right? And so, you know, the prop department would, you know, probably carve out of styrofoam these sculptures that look like people going, ah! And then they'd put them in the background with some colored lights, and then they'd shoot everything in the foreground, right? So, I mean, that's what it reminded me of. So I made all these sculptures in my garage to then take to, we actually shot that nightmare sequence in my mother-in-law worked at a local electric company, and John convinced her to let us use the lunchroom for that nightmare sequence. So there's like one of those accordion folding doors in the middle of the room. So that's the you know, an accordion folding door with faux paneling on it was the background for that. Right? But anyway, because he just needed kind of a bigger space than any of us had. But yeah, so I made several sculptures that were 2-liter bottles and cardboard tubes and stuff that I basically masking taped together into sort of humanoid form, and then did paper mache over all of them. And so I know there's some photos on the Dreamwalkers DVD that you put out that showcase those sculptures. So actually the thing for Housebound was one of those that I still had hanging around. I adapted it for the scene where my character, me and Mike Haig, play these men in black. And so we come upon a character that's been melted by being bit by the critter in Housebound. And we open the car door and their body falls out. And so I had taken that, and so I redid some of the paper mache, and so it was 2-liter bottles and cardboard tubes and stuff. And so it just and then we covered it in Jell-O, and I don't know if we used pudding. There was some chunky pieces of Jell-O, and then I've since learned that buying like hair conditioner at the dollar store is cheaper than buying and making pudding. Plus, you don't have to worry about it going bad because it has milk in it, right? So, so yeah, we had like shampoo and conditioner and Jell-O poured over this paper mache skeleton thing that fell out of the car. And then there's one shot where I lift the head up, and it was really cool. So, yeah, I mean, you know, I dig that stuff. Let me grab something real quick. So this is see if I can make this work. All right, so this is like a weird-ass puppet critter that I made. All right, so it's all just, so I took 2 2-liter bottles and I taped them together, and then I put some Walmart plastic grocery bags over them, right? And then I got some liquid latex, right? So actually was, well, this is not, you don't find that in your kitchen, but yeah, here it is. I just bought some liquid latex, right? So, and then some of these veins on here, let me find a good one. Like this stuff here are just rubber bands, right? I cut rubber bands and then laid them on here and put all this stuff on. So, and then at the end of it, it doesn't really work anymore because I've used this a bunch of times now and it's falling apart. Actually, you can see. So this is a little fake fingernail. So like the teeth at the end of this are fake fingernails. It looked pretty good when I first started using it. But anyway, so the idea is this is like a critter that comes up out of a sump pump for Thing 666. And then I've subsequently used it in Dark Zone 13 Part 2. but yeah, I just made this myself on my kitchen table, you know, and it was fun, and it's fallen apart now, but it worked, you know, for what I needed it to do. And yeah, so some of that stuff is fun to do. Yeah. I mean, overall, I like doing all the parts. You know, sometimes it's a drag. You know, sometimes I'm editing. I'm like, oh, this is a pain, right? And sometimes you're shooting, and this is a pain. And sometimes, you know, you're trying to make an effect or something, and it's not working. But in general, I like all the parts, right? So I like writing and directing and shooting and cutting, and I like making music for stuff, and I like making weird props and stuff like that. So that's why a lot of my stuff takes a long time, because I do a lot of it myself. But I like doing that. So yeah, still fun.
No, it's very, very, very cool. I mean, so I mean, for someone like me, especially when I was first kind of discovering your work, it was like, wow, I can make all this stuff from stuff at home. You know, I never thought like, oh, you can use pudding, or you can use 2-liter bottles, or hey, paper mache can build monsters and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So.
Or lunch meat. I mean,
Cool.
the remake of Odd Noggins that I did, there is an awesome scene. I really love it, where this one girl melts, and you know, initially it's her just with this lemon pudding on her face, and she shakes around and stuff. But then once she falls on the floor, it's a plastic skull that I'm puppeteering with my hand inside of it. But I actually took little pearl onions, and I drew pupils on them with a marker. I stuck those in the eye sockets, and then I took pieces of turkey lunch meat, and I sort of tore the edges so they were a little jagged. And I put some pudding on the skull, and then I pushed the turkey onto it, and then put more pudding over the whole thing, right? And then put a wig on it so it kind of matched the girl. And then I shot it, and I'm just shaking my hand around. I'm opening the mouth a little bit, but I'm shaking it around. And by shaking it around, not only is the pudding all splattering off of it, but eventually the turkey starts to peel off. And so it looks like skin is just falling off of her face and revealing the skull underneath. And then at a certain point, the eyeballs pop out, because they're just onions. They're sort of stuck in this plastic skull. And I love that scene. That's one of my favorite scenes. And, you know, that costs next to nothing to do. It's all just food, and, you know, and grosses people out to this day.
For sure. One thing I've liked to do, I've done in quite a few of my movies, is I've done quite a few eye stabbings, you know.
Oh, yeah.
And what I've always done for those is I just get a hard-boiled egg and just put a pupil on it, and half it, put some blood, put a blood tube near it, and and 9 times out of 10 you get a pretty good shot out of it, you know.
I love stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
it's all about, you know, like, exactly what can you do for cheap and easy, and out of household stuff. So very, very cool.
And this will sound bad, but I often think about what's the minimum I need. And I mean, by that, and I apply that to most everything in terms of making movies, because I actually have talked to several people about this. You know, I have to have someone in an office, you know, on a phone call or something. It's like, what's the minimum I need to sell that, right? Do they need a computer in the shot? Do I just need the sound of other phones ringing in the background to give the idea, oh, this person is in an office? You know, it's like, I don't have to go find an office. You know, I don't have to like coordinate, like approach some business, say, can I shoot in one of your cubicles for this movie? And they want to know what it's about. It's like, well, it's about a naked vampire. You know, it's like, and then I have to coordinate and go there and get this shot of someone on the phone and everything. Or I can just shoot it at my computer and then add sound effects in the background, and it's fine, right? And I control that environment. There's two different, I did a shot where there was a sheriff on the phone, right? I just set up in my garage with him, and I printed up some wanted posters. I stuck those on the wall behind him, right? I had a fake plant that I stuck sort of back behind him just as background. And then I literally added like the sound effects of like file cabinet drawers being closed, and some phones going off, and some people talking. And this guy actually has a shirt, like a sheriff's shirt from previous movies he's worked on. I think it looks fine. You know, it's just a phone call scene. It cuts to him. He's got the uniform on. There's wanted posters. There's probably less than a minute total running time of the whole thing, but you know, that's all I think it needed. Right. And I often apply that. I tell people, like, you know, if you're shooting in the woods, you could turn 90 degrees and it's a different part of the woods. You don't have to hike in another mile. I mean, you can if you have a particular spot you want or whatever, but you could probably just turn 90 degrees and shoot some more, and then turn another 90 degrees and shoot some more. You could do that in the house. You know, this side of the room is location B, but you could probably turn around and that side of the room could be the other person's house that they're talking to or something like that. And so you apply that to a lot of other stuff like the effects. Like, what do we really need to show? You know, this guy gets hit by an axe, but really we could tuck the axe into his chest and then pull it out and run that in reverse and it'll look like it's going into him. So do we need to build a fake chest and everything that a real axe goes through? No, we can cheat it with this other thing. And then you cut away to something else, you cut back, and then you've been able to then you do makeup and put a wound on there with some blood and everything. But, you know, it's a bit of a cheat, but it still looks good. And I guess that's where a lot of that stuff comes to, like the boiled egg. That's genius. There was actually in Platoon of the Dead, we did that where I can't remember what exactly the scene, but someone is pulling an eyeball out, right? And I think they eat it. It's been a while, but I do remember the scene where John had an eyeball, and then I think Rob we glued some stringy stuff with fake blood on it, the back of it for the nerve, right? And so they pull it out, and like the optic nerve is coming out. I mean, that's all you need, right? People get the scene that grosses the most people out is when I have this character, Mr. Birch, eating a jar of mayonnaise, right? And it's just, you know, we cleaned up a jar of mayonnaise and I put a fake label on it and we filled it up with Cool Whip. And so he just had to eat a whole jar of Cool Whip, which he still complained about, but it was better than if he had to eat mayonnaise. But, you know, I mean, people see that, they're like, they know it's not mayonnaise, but it still is like super gross. And yet it's so simple. But it's kind of like that's all you need.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I've definitely kind of followed similar things. I mean, when we made the Zombarella movie, for instance, almost all that was shot in a one-bedroom apartment, you know, that I lived in.
Yeah, right.
And it was all about, you know, I'll hang this fabric from the wall for this shot, and I'll move these things into the room. And
right.
It was literally almost all the movie was shot at literally in one room. It was just changing fabrics out, changing camera angles, changing props out. So, I mean, people can definitely, you know, if you're listening and you're kind of a budding filmmaker, you know, I hope if you get something from this conversation me and Joe are having is like, there's so much you can do with just using your imagination and thinking outside of the box. You don't need $1 million. You don't need to raise, you know, $50,000 on Indiegogo to make a good movie. You can, you know, get together with some friends and some good creative ideas and really put together something awesome.
Yeah.
And I definitely want to, so we're probably getting close on time, so I definitely want to kind of talk about some of your newer projects as well. You've mentioned Dark Zone 13 Part 2 a couple times now, and I know the first one was kind of an anthology that you produced, and you had quite a few different filmmakers working with you on that one. So can you kind of tell us about this new one, and are you working with other filmmakers again on this one?
Yeah, the first one I started in I can't remember which year it was, 2019, 18, I'm losing track. But the deal was, I usually go to this horror convention in Seattle, Washington called Crypticon Seattle that usually is in May. And so that particular year, I didn't have a brand new movie to show. And it was bumming me out. And so, because it was, for a number of factors, things were in progress, but nothing was done. And so in January, I decided, you know what, I'm going to make a new movie to show. And so I had 4 months to do it. And I did it. I managed to pull it off. It was one of those things like force of sheer will. I'm going to make this happen. And, so one story, it was interesting. Joseph Oakley reminded me of this. He was talking about the doll story he did for that. He's like, yeah, Joe wrote that for Tony Masiello, which isn't technically true. I wrote it for someone else to make for me. And that fell apart. It didn't happen. But then you did ask me at one point about scripts with a doll in it. And I said, hey, I have something I wrote that didn't get made. You could use this, but that didn't work for what you needed. But eventually I had Joseph Oakley make that for me for Dark Zone 13. And then I also had this story, Boris, that I had done with a guy, Philip, in Croatia, actually. And we had done a short that I had just put out for free. And I put it on one of my earlier DVDs as a little extra at the end. But I had an idea to do a Boris 2. And as I was writing it, I realized, you know what I should do? I should just put all of it together, which is what I did. So I basically wrote some more stuff for him to shoot with some of his friends, and then took the original short and this new stuff and kind of trimmed it up a little bit, and that became a story in Dark Zone 13. And then the other 4 stories I did. So for this new one, My friend John Bowker, for a while, lived down in Hollywood, and he shot a short that was kind of a proof of concept. It was I think a sequence for maybe a larger project, and so he hired some guys and shot this little 10-minute scary short, and then never did anything with it. Situations changed, and he just never did anything with it. So all these years, so I told him I was going to make a Dark Zone 13 Part 2, and he said, "Hey, I have that short I made down in California that you could use if you want." And I said, "Yeah." So that is in there, never before seen. So by John.
Thanks.
And then there was a story I wrote several years ago, intending for me to do it, and I just hadn't gotten around to making it. And so I asked Joseph Oakley again if he would make a segment for this. And so that's called Suburban Satanic, and he shot that earlier this year. A few months ago, really, and that looked really great. And so then the other stories I've been shooting over the last several months, I have basically one segment left to shoot, and then some more editing to do on the whole thing, and then all the music. So I mean, there's some more stuff to do, but that's the thing that I'm currently working on. The other two things I've been working on, I just finished up doing Things 666 and Axe Grinder 3. So those will be coming out from Sterling Entertainment. And actually, Axe Grinder 3, I made with Joseph Vogley. The idea from the beginning was we'd make it together. And so I wrote the story in such a way that I basically shot most of this main storyline, and then he shot kind of these filler killers. And so it sort of will flip-flop back and forth between two storylines that eventually converge, and then I shot the ending for it. So yeah, that's what's been happening.
Very cool. Yeah, and you've been doing quite a bit of work with Joseph Vogley lately. How did you guys kind of meet and hook up?
That is a great story. So so there was, I can't remember what year it was now. I think it was 6 years ago. I was showing Odd Noggins at Crypticon, and he had never heard of Crypticon, and somewhere online saw it advertised, and went to their site and was looking at it, and they had listed my movie as being part of the film festival, and they included a trailer, and he saw the trailer, and he told his wife, he's like, "We have got to go to this convention and see this movie." And so he did, and that's when I first met him, and he was just full of energy and loved it, and we just kept in contact after that. And he I can't remember if he made a short, the
Let's Play Dolls, maybe?
it was Last Temptation of Bible Boy.
Oh, Bible Boy, yeah.
That's up on YouTube, and I don't know if that was before he went to the convention or after, but anyways, we kept in contact, and then he made that doll short, and I asked him to make the doll for me, and then subsequently, actually the other thing that a month or two ago I finished Channel 99, which I had been working on that for probably 2 years, and it's my homage to like late night 80s pay cable channel like Showtime and HBO, and also the independent stations when I was growing up. We'd have like the major networks, but then there'd always be like an independent station, and they'd show reruns of Gilligan's Island and stuff like that. But also they'd show a lot of movies, and usually they'd buy syndication packages from different distributors, and a lot of them were like science fiction horror packages. And so there was one in particular here that was out of Portland, Channel 12, and they showed all the Planet of the Apes movies, and they showed Dark Star and Silent Running and all kinds of cool stuff. So it's a combination of my memories of that plus the late night cable stuff, and so I made up my own cable network, Channel 99. So the movie is a bunch of little shorts with some fake trailers and promos for movies in between, and so that just came out a little while ago. I had to premiere at a local theater a couple weekends ago, and that was pretty mind-blowing. But anyways, Joseph is in that. I guess that's where I was getting to, was he came down right before the lockdown. So it was like March of 2020. He came down and we shot a werewolf story. And then that next Monday they shut the whole state down. So we got that in under the wire. And so a lot of the movie I shot before that, and then I shot one thing last fall. There was a little window where things were opening up a little bit more, and so I shot something with just a couple people, and then everything sort of shut down again. And then earlier this year, I ended up finishing up a few things that I had left to do for it and got that done. But anyways, yeah, so I met him at that convention, and we just, stayed in touch, and then he did a couple things for me, and I'm going to be in his next project if all things work out. So it's been cool. I think he's a kindred spirit. My friends have said he's a mini me, he's a mini you, which he kind of is. He reminds me a lot of me.
No, that's awesome. And
Yeah,
another very talented filmmaker as well.
yeah, for
I'm
sure.
not just plugging Specimen 6 because we put it out. I mean, definitely check out Specimen 6, people. It's
Yeah,
definitely a slasher like no other. You have not seen a slasher movie.
yeah. I just watched that again with a friend of mine this last weekend, and yeah, it's unlike any. That's the thing that's so impressive about it. I mean, he had all these ideas of different, I don't know, different genres or different influences and stuff, and he threw them all in there. But it is, unlike any slasher that I had seen. And so, if not for that, just the creativity behind it, it's impressive.
Oh, for sure. I mean, nowadays, especially when everything's been pretty much done, it's very hard to come across anything that
Yeah,
comes across as unique or different. And it's so refreshing, especially in the indie world, to see that, because
yeah,
it definitely doesn't come along too often anymore.
right, yeah.
And I definitely want to ask you, like, you work on so many projects at once, Joe. I mean, it's so admirable, and I don't know how you do it. Like, I know, like, we've been chatting, over the last years or so, kind of working on these DVD releases, and you would mention the different things you're shooting and stuff like that. I guess my question is how do you kind of keep it straight working on so many different projects at once?
Well, there's been a few times when I've really felt the burden of that. Like, oh, I was just stuck in this hole? Why did I do all this stuff? One time when I put out Beneath a Dead Moon, which is a collection of older and not as old at the time shorts. That was one where, like, there were a couple shorts that John and I had done many years earlier, and that was like one of them I had to actually reassemble from the raw footage. It was like the master copies were so bad or not available that I just started from scratch with it, and I ran into tons of technical problems with it. And that was when I was like, oh my, and so I was making like new movies, but also it's kind of like you, is like, I wanted to, these different pieces of short things that I had done, I wanted to make them available for people, And so the way to do that was, well, I'll just lump them all together in this anthology. But it required a bunch of sort of like forensic work. That's the way I describe it, I mean, literally at one point, John was like digging through an attic trying to find tapes for me. And at one point, literally brought over a big Ziploc bag of like 15 unlabeled high 8 tapes. And I was like, oh my God. He's like, I think it's in there somewhere. So, yeah, so forensic is already, but I just remember a point where I was working on that and having lots of problems. And I was like, why did I do this? Because I have like these other 3 things that I've been trying to finish and I can't get any of them done. But most of the time what happens is, I'm working on something and it's getting close to being done and I just can't stop my brain from having new ideas, and so I'll sometimes, against my better judgment, I suppose, I'll jump into a new thing, and so then I end up juggling various projects. In recent years, I'll give you an example. I mean, I was working on finishing Channel 99, but I was doing a couple of Things movies for Dave Sterling, and then he wanted me to do this Axe Grinder 3 movie, and like a quickie, as he called it. It turned out because that was the whole thing with Dave. Like, for the longest time, he wanted me to do some stuff for him, but I'm like, man, it takes me like a year to make a movie, right? I can't do your 2-week turnaround wonders like I always hear about. And eventually he was like, well, look, I really want to work with you. Let's work on your time. If you can't do a quick, turnaround, then what can we do? So, but the Axe Grinder thing was almost like a test. He's like, it'd be interesting to see. So he actually had the idea for me to make it with Joseph. So, we were coming out of the lockdown anyway. So, but it was also about splitting the work. And, so that took us like 3 months, I think, all told. And that's pretty quick for me to go from, like, if there's nothing, and then 3 months later, there's a finished movie. And actually, because like Channel 99 probably would have been finished a little bit earlier if I hadn't taken that on. I mean, I took it on. It's my fault or whatever, my decision. But it was an interesting thing to do. And so, you know, in that case, I had like 3 things going on at the same time. But one of them was because someone said, well, how about you do this? Oh, okay, I'll do that. I've had that happen before where like Phil Herman has done a bunch of anthologies. And I'll be, you know, have a couple of things going and he'll say, hey, you know, can you do a short to put into this thing? And I'll be like, okay. You know, so then that's one more thing I put on top of it. But I think it's just the way I work. You know, I'm always having ideas. I've got tons of Google Doc files with all kinds of ideas. Sometimes it's just a sentence or a title, and sometimes it's an outline, and sometimes it's part of a script, you know. And invariably I'll go back and, you know, work on stuff. The werewolf short that I mentioned that Joseph Oakley was in, I shot that. Or I wrote that originally, I think I figured 18 years ago or something like that. I wrote it for a couple neighbors of a friend of mine who lived in a trailer park. And that was the whole thing. It was like, these 2 people, Tim and Des, they live in the trailer across the way. We could shoot there and they could do this and we could shoot down at the laundry room building. And then that just never happened. And all these years later, I pulled it up. I had always wanted to make it, but I pulled it up and kind of rewrote a few things to work for the new locations and shot that. So that's, you know, it's a question of how do I do it? I can't help it. And I always tell people like the movie thing, it's just an addiction. I can't, at this point anyway, I can't stop making them. I just keep moving ahead. So I got so many ideas and sometimes I can't just wait until something's all wrapped up to jump into the next thing. Or opportunities pop up. I mean, Drifter is a good example. The location is what inspired that movie. My friend who owned that house said, hey, we sold the house, but the new buyers aren't coming for several months. And so it'll be empty. And if you want to go shoot a murder scene there, you can just clean it up. And he literally thought I'd go just shoot some random one, you know, single scene of someone getting killed in the kitchen. But I wrote a whole movie based, you know, on that availability. So sometimes that happens. Either someone asks me to be a part of a project or a situation arises like, oh, you know, yeah, so-and-so is going to be in town or you can have the run of this house for 2 months. And so then I just pile on top because I want to take advantage of that.
Right. No, that's so cool. That's so cool. I've definitely been in similar situations where it's like, oh crap, yeah, actually similar thing. I had an empty house. I was like, oh crap, I should do something with this. And we shot something and it was terrible. No one will ever see that one, but but you know, it's definitely, you know, great to have things like that kind of pop up where you can kind of take advantage of it and use it for, you know, your art. And
yeah,
I mean, gosh, Joe, you've done so many movies. I know we don't have time to talk about half of them. I'm definitely I want to have you back on again to talk about some of the other movies sometime. But
yeah, man, I would love that. I would love
it.
But
I want to ask you, I usually like to ask a couple generic questions, and this is just for my own nerdy things. So I would love to know, because I know you're also a fan of the shot on video genre as well, and low budget and micro budget filmmaking. Is there a shot on video film? I know it's hard to pick like a favorite, but is there one that's kind of always stuck out to you that you just really enjoy?
Well, so Ozone, Jared Brookwalter's Ozone is one. I just remember really digging that when it came out. I mean, I bought it when it came out. I've got copies of it upstairs. Yeah, just because it was ambitious, it was a cool story, and I loved the whole concept of it. They had a kind of a monsterish guy at the end, and I really dug that one a lot. Ron Ford's Hollywood Mortuary. Have you seen that one?
Oh yeah.
Yes. That was so great.
Yeah.
That was just great. And I don't know, Crawling Brain that he did was also good. That was just, he, you know, had all of his, that was where he put all his influences right in there.
Spoiler, guys, I'll go ahead and say it now. We're putting out Crawling Brain sometime.
Oh, sweet.
So
Sweet.
Very excited about that one.
Yeah. And I remember he was like the brain, like was from a mold from like Fiend Without a Face or something crazy like that. I don't know which movie it was, but, and then his, Ted Newsom helped him out. He got a bunch of music cues, I think, that were from those movies, and I was like, oh my god, that's super awesome. Like I said, it was just, that was his total love letter, and he's described it that way too. It's like, I loved these movies and these performers, and so this is my tribute to all that stuff, and that really came through. So yeah, I mean, that type of stuff. Early on there was a ton of stuff, a lot of the Sub Rosa stuff. I remember, what is that movie? I mean, Leaf Junker's Darkness was good. I know that was like 8mm or something like that. But what was it? Oh, it was Shattered Dead.
Shattered Dead, yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
That was one I remember seeing and being like, wow, that was ambitious and impressive, because, the story was actually, the concept was really creative and the effects were really amazing. And just, I remember the scope of it, being really impressed by that. And actually another, I know we got to wrap the story up. Another one was Sinister.
Oh yeah.
I'm trying to think, who's the guy that did that? Was that Brian?
Ronnie
yeah,
Sorter.
yeah, Ronnie Sorter, right? Yeah, that was really good, and that was kind of like a heist movie with horror in it or whatever. But I was really impressed with that, and that was, I think, just a shot-on-video movie that Sub Rosa put out early on. Yeah, tons of stuff, and that was the day. That was back in the day. They'd make boxes, like not even just a clamshell with a Xerox in it, like I was doing. That was actually a printed box for those things.
I'd say Sinister, that's one of those ones that just had that box with the red glowing eyes.
Yeah, right.
And the way the logo was written, it was just, you couldn't help but I rented that from a mom and pop video store.
Oh yeah?
When I was younger, was how I first saw that film, and that box just grabbed you,
Yeah, for sure.
And I mean, that's kind of just movies in general. I mean, especially back then, you look at a lot of the independent, low budget shot on video stuff, and some of that stuff had such amazing artwork.
Yeah.
And, I like hearing some of the stories some of the filmmakers have shared with me. Some of them mention, Jason Paul Collum shared a great story with me where he was talking about someone renting one of his films. I don't recall exactly which one, but he was working at the video store.
Oh yeah.
And they come back afterward to bring it back, and they go, "Oh, this was a steaming pile of shit. It was shot on video." And it's just so funny, because obviously a lot of people would have no idea, knowing that these movies were shot on video, because they'd be presented with great cover art. There'd still be good still photographs on the back cover, good synopsises.
Yeah.
And so some people, unsuspecting people, would just be like, "Oh my gosh, what is this?" Where some of us other guys are more like, I know for me, it was just so inspiring to watch shot on video content. I mean, I think like a lot of people, when I first saw probably my first one, and I don't recall what it was, but probably Redneck Zombies or something.
I was going to say, I swear to God, Redneck Zombies was the first shot on video that I watched. And my buddies and I rented movies for the weekend type of thing, and that was definitely one where we started up. We're like, what is this? Because it was obviously shot on video. I totally remember that and that reaction, but then we enjoyed the movie.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, that's the thing, is a lot of people would rent them though. Redneck Zombies is a really good one, where there are some that aren't as good. And I'm not going to put down anyone's work, so I don't want to say anything like that. But, where people would, rent it and be like, "Oh, this is crap. This is shot on video. I could do this at home." And, so the genre kind of did get with a lot of horror fans, it kind of had a bad kind of connotation to it,
I agree.
Horror fans. And it's so great to see now that, especially even with the younger generations, like we were talking earlier, embracing physical media and all that, seeing them embrace these movies and seeing them for what they are, which is these fun, creative movies made with a lot of heart. Because I always say, regardless if you think the movie is produced well or has good production value, these things were made with heart. It's not easy to make a movie, and I know you can attest to that.
Oh yeah,
3/4 inch days and stuff like that. I mean,
I tell you, when I was doing Dr. Squid, I got on a screener list from a few different places, doing reviews, and it was a double-edged sword, because sometimes you get something, you're like, oh, this isn't very good. And early on, I would just review it. My whole idea back then was like, when I would watch review shows with like Siskel and Ebert, I generally agreed with Ebert, but sometimes, I'd see somebody like, oh, why did he not like that, right? And I sort of came to realize that you got to take any criticism with a grain of salt. It's like, or any review, because you're gonna have different tastes. So you got to find people who have your taste for your recommendations, right? And so I was trying to be, the guy that liked all those schlocky horror movies. If you like these schlocker horror movies, here's my review of that from my perspective or my taste, right? But eventually it became difficult because once I started making stuff, I realized how much work there is, right? And I would feel bad, like, all right, this thing is terrible, but I know they probably spent, 10 weekends on this and a lot of time. It's like I could tell they had to put time and effort into it, but it wasn't very good. But I'd feel bad, like, oh, I don't want to just tell everybody this movie's terrible. So I just stopped reviewing stuff. I mean, that's a cop-out, but it's true. I was just like, I can't do it. I just can't do it because, I know what it takes to make this stuff. And so I just, stopped doing those reviews because I didn't want to be mean that way, because even the crappiest stuff takes a lot of effort usually to make.
For sure. No, I kind of agree. I was kind of the same way with my website. It kind of got to a point, people would ask me to review stuff. If I didn't like the movie, I didn't want to review it because I didn't want to say anything bad. And I'd always try to find positive things to say about the work regardless of it. I mean, it's like one of those things I learned in art school, it's like you have to be able to give good and bad criticism. You don't want to just give someone just positive or just negative because you want to challenge them. You want to challenge them as an artist to grow and to get better as an artist.
Yeah, yeah.
And, like you said, people put their blood, sweat, and tears into these things. And another thing, I mean, I think that happens with some of these movies is sometimes they just don't click. You know what I mean? Sometimes you have to watch a movie 3 or 4 times and then all of a sudden it's just like, bam, oh my gosh, I love this movie,
Oh, true.
I know there's definitely been plenty of shot on video and just even other films. The first time you watch it, you're just like, oh, I don't really like it. It wasn't very good. But then you see it a few years later after different life experiences. And then it's like, wow, this really connects with me now,
Yeah. The one thing I thought, I'm jumping back a little bit, but the fact that they showed Sledgehammer on Joe Bob Briggs, The Last Drive-In, is, I think that's a good thing. I mean, you're talking about younger people being more accepting or being, getting exposed just to shot on video stuff from that era and not necessarily having that immediate reaction of, oh, that's just like soap opera. That looks like a soap opera. That's garbage. I could do that in my backyard, that I think a lot of them don't necessarily have that. I mean, Joe Bob had to make a point of saying these were shot on video. I mean, explain the era and what was going on, to sort of preface like, all right, don't be too judgmental because here's what was going on, which, obviously you had to do. But I just, I think that there may be a more accepting audience to some of that stuff. And that, to me, that was an amazing, huge platform that got on, and who knows what that leads to.
Oh, for sure. And that's always, I always say anything that's good for shot on video, I'm for, I'm not gonna lie. Like recently I lost a big contract to another distributor. I won't mention names, but ultimately I think this distributor will hopefully do really good with these titles. And ultimately is what it's about. It's about getting these movies out to fans and getting people to see these movies because we're all fans as well, and it's like, maybe if I can't do it, I hope whoever does do it does a great job with it and puts as much work as I would do into that.
Yeah.
And I say a win for, anytime shot. It's like when Blair Witch, I don't know if you remember when Blair Witch came out, but I remember just being so freaking stoked that a movie that was made for no money, that was partially shot on video, was going to be in theaters. And this was before it came out. I remember reading about it first in like Fangoria or something, or those magazines, and just being like, wow, I really got to see this movie. And I didn't even know the hype because I didn't really watch TV much or anything like that, and it was just so cool to see an independent movie shot on video getting that kind of acceptance. And I think things like that do open up doors for people to look into other pieces in that genre, So Sledgehammer being screened on Joe Bob, hopefully the next thing you know, they're looking at Dimension of Blood from Joe Sherlock, and
never know.
Donald Farm, and all these other movies by these shot on video directors, and that these guys finally get a little bit of credit that they deserve for really being pioneers in, I don't want to use the word backyard, probably DIY filmmaking would probably be the better way to put it, because guys like, even you, Joe, I mean, like, for me, we're very influential, and I think there's a lot of people like me who we wouldn't have, I would have never thought I could work in the film industry. You know what I mean? I grew up a very poor kid, not from the right side of the tracks, so to speak. And, to see all these other people making these movies and with the resources they had, it gave me the like hope, like, well, maybe I can get into the film industry, you know, and I know there's a lot of other guys like me out there too, and I just think it's so
Yeah.
great, and I'm so glad that people like you and other filmmakers are finally starting to get, you know, your just desserts as you deserve. And I definitely recommend, I'll get off my soapbox in a sec, but I definitely recommend people go check out Joe Sherlock's movies, go to skullfaceastronaut.com, go check out these movies. They're so good. We got some at SOVHORROR.com, a lot of his early stuff. And I mean, you know, and we worked really hard on those releases too. We did a lot of, I know we did like full new sound mixes on most of them.
Yeah.
And, you know.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I want to say is that the stuff that you put out of my old projects, I mean, I did a lot of work in terms of tracking stuff down, finding old masters, and I scanned a bazillion photos and stuff, commentary tracks, did some interviews, right? But it was all worth it because, you know, it was a great opportunity, and I, you know, the stuff that you put out was fantastic, and that's, you said earlier, you know, the amount of work you put in, and that's what's awesome about it is that, you know, you see the value in these as movies and artifacts of an era, and that are worth looking at and celebrating, and, you know, releasing with all this extra stuff to say, here's the full meal deal, right? And that takes a lot of work, and you know, the fact that you do all that is great because you know, it's like you obviously have the passion for it in terms of these movies, and, like, you know, you want to do it right, and you're doing it right, and that I'm just flattered to be a part of that and to have such great releases of those projects. So I appreciate that.
Oh, thanks, Joe. And I just want to recommend, and I'll say, you know, working on some of your stuff was so enjoyable. I mean, I love the movies, and I always say, you know, people ask me sometimes like, how do you pick out movies and stuff like that? And I always say, I only put out movies I like because I'm going to be attached to these movies for so long, you know.
Yeah.
Even with your stuff, I mean, we were probably working on this kind of together back and forth on things for probably close to a year, I would think. And
yeah, probably.
all the work that goes into these, and you really do have to care about the movies. And I mean, it's like the drive-in double features we did of some of your work.
Yeah.
To me, those were so much fun to work on, and I had such a blast working on those. And your movies just lent themselves to that drive-in aesthetic.
Yeah, man,
So,
I watched them that way, and that totally worked.
I would love, you know, you definitely have my permission. If you can find a drive-in, Joe, that wants to screen those, please, it'd be so cool.
I might
come out to Oregon and check it out.
Yeah.
Cool.
Well, I just want to add real quick. You know, you mentioning being influential. Seeing Don Dohler's The Alien Factor on that independent station, that Channel 12 station I was mentioning. You know, that was part of a syndication package that they bought. But seeing that movie that he made in backyards and his basement, etc., that totally made me realize, like, I could do that. I mean, he actually shot. You know, I grew up back in New Jersey, so actually it was a weird thing because I had moved all the way across the country to Oregon, and I saw this movie where everybody talked like everybody talked back there. You know, this is down south in Baltimore, south of Jersey, and but you know, and the architecture, et cetera, was similar. And so that even more so was like, hey, that's like, I grew up around all that stuff. This guy is just like me. I could make a movie with a monster on the hills behind my house. And you know, here I am, right? All these years later, having made stuff. So, you know, like Joseph Vogley is a great example. I mean, I met him at the convention, and I know he said that I've inspired him. It's been really fun to work with him. And I, you know, I did a panel at a convention about DIY filmmaking, and I made like a handout. So that's one of the first things I did. I sent that to him. I said, here's my brain dump of all the stuff, all the advice I would give you in a 4-page PDF, right? But it's exciting to be able to do that and help people out in that way. And I think that's great because there have been plenty of people, Fred Olen Ray included. I mean, that guy, I mean, the retro media boards were a great thing, but even just personal correspondence with him, he's been very honest, you know, straight out honest, but encouraging and very helpful. And so it's great if I can do some of that for people, I'd love to do that.
Right.
That's wonderful to hear.
Awesome. So awesome. And I'm sure you saw that news today about the new Lost Don Dollar movie coming out.
I did.
Yeah,
I am gonna order it when I get off of this meeting.
Yeah, I'm definitely gonna order it too.
Yeah.
Big fan of his work. Great film.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, we're about to wrap up. Any things you want to plug or let people know that you're working on or anything like that?
I don't know. I think we covered all that stuff. I would just say, Skullface Astronaut's the hub for everything, skullfaceastronaut.com. You can get my movies. There's streaming options. There's DVDs. There's some shorts and stuff for free out there too. And like I have convention trip diaries on there, and there's some production diaries on there. So, I mean, I've just built that up for a long time. So there's a lot of content if you want to dig around in there that's for free on there. And thanks for having me on. And I encourage, if anybody's, if people are into SOV horror and that stuff from the late 90s, goofball vampire stories, I would say, check out these releases from SOV horror, because they are just jam-packed full of good stuff. If anything, even if you're not a big fan of the movie, you get, bang for your buck, because there's a bunch of stuff on there.
Right.
Yeah. But thanks for having me on. This was great.
I almost forgot to mention too, I just want to mention it really quickly, just another kind of teaser, is you are working on a short for the next Natasha Knighty movie.
I am.
And that's really exciting. So we're going to have we're going to have Ron Ford, as well as Madeline Deering doing shorts for this next one, and I'll be doing the wraparound and some commercials. So
awesome.
Really excited. Such a great team of people there, and really excited to be finally kind of working together on producing something with you. And hopefully maybe we can help produce some stuff down the line as well. So very cool. And I appreciate you taking the time. I know you're so busy with all your projects, so it's so cool for you to be involved. I knew when I did the next one, I was like, I kind of made my dream team of people, and you were on the top of that list, Joe.
Awesome.
I was so glad to have you involved.
No pressure, right? I'll do the best I can.
Well, it's a Fred Olen Wood movie, so it's okay.
That's true.
All right. Cool. Well, thanks again, Joe. It's awesome rapping with you. Let's definitely have you on again. I mean, you have so many movies we didn't even get to talk about, and
that sounds cool.
Hours about them. So we'll definitely have you on again soon. Maybe when you finish, your next project or whatnot, get that out. I'll promote that. So
we can dig into the library. That'd be cool.
Right. Nice. Cool. All right. Well, thanks everyone for listening, watching, and just remember skullfaceastronaut.com and also SOVHorror.com. We got lots of cool stuff coming out next month. We're putting out a Joe Meredith's Variant, which is a extremely gory, crazy. I mean, this movie is amazing. You got to see this movie. So that's coming out next month from us.
Very cool. Very cool. Talk about a guy making his own effects. There's such cool stuff in there. I'm excited to see that, because I bought that from him, but I'm definitely buying it from you too, because I know there'll be extra stuff on there.
Yeah, we got a bunch of new extra stuff. Joe's been really cool to do that.
Great.
So. Cool. All right. Well, hey, thanks guys, and thanks Joe, and we'll see you next time on the SOV Horror Podcast. Bye.